Hi, I'm David Matthews, and this is Anti-Social Media. Today, I'm talking to award-winning journalist Ioan Grillo. I first got in touch with Ioan in the autumn of 2019 after receiving, and I must warn you, a very graphic clip of an alleged rapist being attacked by a pit bull as a twisted form of punishment. Those responsible for the attack are believed to be a cartel based somewhere in Mexico. What I discovered from my conversations with Ioan, who's worked as a journalist in Mexico for some 20 years, is a whole story of social media being used as a propaganda tool by the cartels.
In Mexico, you've seen gangs and drug cartels and criminals using violence on video and putting it on the internet for a decade and a half. One of the very first kind of splatter videos, or like snuff movies, I guess, using an old term that I saw and that emerged was all the way back in 2005, late 2005. And in that one, it came out of Acapulco, supposedly. And it showed the interrogation of a gang member. And you saw this guy kind of strapped to a chair being interrogated. And at the end of the video, they put a gun to his head and blew his brains out, very literally.
Wow.
Now, that video was actually, that wasn't posted on like the internet in the same way that videos are today or later were. Because at that time, it wasn't as easy to post videos online. So that actually turned up as on a VHS tape.
Okay, so old school.
Yeah, going back to those days. It turned up on a VHS tape and was actually given to a newspaper in the United States, like a regional newspaper in the United States. Actually in Washington state, I think it was. Now the person, they didn't really know what to do with it. They looked on and they Googled and they found another reporter called Alfredo Corchado who worked for the Dallas Morning News, and they saw somebody who was mentioned in the tape, a person who had been murdered in a different murder, mentioned. They Googled it and saw he'd written a story with that person mentioned. So they called him, and he put out the video. And then it was shown on Mexican TV, not completely in entirety, but it was shown on Mexican TV, and that was kind of the beginning where you start to see these. Now, going back a little bit before this, we'd seen these murder videos coming out of the Middle East. And there was the video by al-Sakawi and his guys who were Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And then later, I think they became the genesis of the Islamic State. And they committed a murder of an American contractor, and they chopped his head off with a sword. And that video was shown in Mexican TV in full. I remember myself watching it on Mexican TV in full. And this was about
unexpurgated, so the full everything, the full 9 yards.
Yeah, this was about 2003, I think, or 2004. And I remember it was a Mexican news show that was an hour-long news show. And the news presenter saying, we're going to show this video. And from the beginning of the show, telling you they're going to show it. But they didn't show it until right at the end of the news show. So you kept watching, kept on the channel waiting for this to be shown.
And sorry, as far as you were aware, had it been widely circulated in other territories before that?
So I'd seen it talked about. I'm not sure, and I know that on British TV news they're not going to show that stuff in full. On most American TV news, and it was interesting. It was a Mexican TV showing the murder of an American, so it's kind of interesting dynamic there. But like so at the end of it, they showed the whole thing. So I remember watching it, was like, oh God, I was like, are they going to cut? Are they going to cut? And it was like, no, they showed it. So it was like, you saw the whole thing, the head coming off, the sword, bang, something the head in the guy's hand. So they've seen this idea, this kind of idea of the use of violence and the use of using videos technology to have the violence as a propaganda tool, and getting this out there. So you saw these things. Now, as the Mexican beheadings grew, now one of the guys who was at the time the head of the Federal Investigation Agency, which is the kind of head of the Mexican FBI, he later became the architect of the Mexican drug war and is now in fact in prison because he was accused of taking money from drug traffickers. Right. And in fact now he's in prison and trying to get out of prison on the grounds that he might get coronavirus while locked up in a US federal prison. Right. And this guy was a guy called General Garcia Luna, and he actually said when the Mexican cartels began to increase their decapitation and these videos, and he said, I think they're inspired by the Islamic radicals, by Al Qaeda. That's what is really inspiring these guys to do these things. So then you saw in 2006, you started to see the use of decapitation grow in Mexico. So there was one incident again in Acapulco, this great beach resort where...
which we associate over here with, spring break and kind of, cheesy songs like Going Loco down in Acapulco.
Yeah, Going Loco in Acapulco is the classic. I mean, spring break now is, Cancun, Cabo, so they don't really go to Acapulco anymore. Acapulco was, big back in the day. The Tarzan actor going down there, the kind of Elvis Presley stuff, kind of Frank Sinatra, kind of American stars going to 50s, 60s. As the violence became very violent, violence increased, foreign tourism would stay away, and it still kept up with Mexican tourism. And among the people fighting, you had a guy whose nickname was La Barbie, like a Barbie doll. Reason being was he's kind of he was actually a Mexican American with kind of blonde hair. That's what they called him, like a Barbie doll.
Okay, right.
And he went to a private school in Texas. And I talked to one guy who went to school with him, and he said he was like a kind of friendly jock. That's how he described this guy. Kind of guy, right. Like a big old beefy guy, but kind of a friendly jock. Various things. He got into drugs, got into flipping drugs over the border, went down to Mexico, and I think some of the big cartel bosses just liked this guy. He was like one of these very charismatic kind of guys. And he rose very quickly to become quite a big player for the Sinaloa cartel. And he was one of the guys who was leading their efforts in Acapulco to try and keep control of the city. And he might have been one of the guys really behind some of these early murder videos and decapitation techniques. So there was a shootout with some policemen and some cartel hitmen, and the policemen did well and killed a bunch of these hitmen. So the cartel was very angry, and in response, grabbed two of the policemen and cut their heads off and stuck them in a wall. And that was one of these kind of, now that wasn't posted on social media, but that was a public act of violence. You're not only going to kill them, you're going to stick their heads on a wall. So the press came down and took photographs and started, putting this out. Then you had another cartel a couple of months later. That was in June of 2006. Another cartel called La Familia Michoacana, who then cut off 5 heads of a rival gang and rolled them into a nightclub dance floor. And that was, that made actually world headlines. It was like 5 heads were rolled into a disco dance floor.
While people are on the dance floor.
Yeah. People there, obviously, that's the floor clear of that one. That's a.
Gotcha. Jesus Christ, yeah.
Now, I was working at the time for news agency, and the local video stringer sent in video of that, and I saw video. It wasn't of the moment they were rolled in; it was afterwards. These 5 heads, with blood on the dance floor, and the kind of video goes and looks at the floor and then goes onto them. You see their kind of faces of these heads that are kind of like, no life in them. It's kind of weird. It's kind of eerie looking at decapitated heads. And the news agency didn't put that video out. It was like, no, we can't put this on our wire. It's just too gruesome. But the story was around and the stories were written. It was like out there, okay, this is the cartel. They're on the map. So cartels were getting reputation by these acts of violence. And then you started to see videos going up of decapitations, of this violence going up onto the internet, then putting up their own videos. So originally they started just putting them up on YouTube in the early days. Now, I actually remember seeing graphic murder videos on YouTube. And it was in the kind of earlier days when YouTube were not really having a handle on this. Funnily enough, this was probably around 2008, I got a phone call from somebody from Google. And they had some weird idea. They were like, oh, we're looking out for some idea of some scheme we can do to track violence in Mexico to help, the fight against violence, some altruistic thing they're doing between making trillions of dollars. And I said, well, you are aware that on YouTube you've got violent snuff movies and stuff coming out. And oh yeah, we own YouTube actually. Oh yeah, Google, we bought YouTube. So yeah, you might want to have a look at this. They were taken off. And obviously it's now YouTube are pretty fast, I think, about taking off violent videos. But so they turned to other parts of the internet, and there's one website which grew up was Blog del Narco. And Blog del Narco was this kind of mysterious website that no one was really sure where it was coming from. Where was the source of this? And they had this thing saying, well, we're showing the reality of what's going on, but they posted these violent videos, violent propaganda videos by the cartels. So you then saw they became like a switchboard because all the different cartels could send in their videos there. So you had that time in the drug war, this kind of a lot of, and it was creating news. We as journalists would go there and look, okay, what cartels posted, what have they done, what message they have, and a lot of real gruesome videos would go on there.
And who was behind this website?
So there's been there was later kind of interviews with people, with some of the people behind it who were like, you say kind of quasi journalists, people kind of doing this thing. So I believe there's actually a whole book even. They did a kind of book about the kind of Blog del Narco experience. They were, it's ethically, it's an interesting one. Now, from that point of view, though, all of us had to ask these ethical questions in all of the media. How much violence do we show? And as we were covering this, and as I was covering this, going over the years, so beginning from 2004, you weren't really seeing these public acts of violence in the same way. Then we start hitting 2008, 2009, and these are happening all over the place. And you're just seeing beheadings everywhere. So I was writing stories about beheadings and doing some news reports and referencing them, and sometimes showing some violence or photographs of violence. And I have photographs of some of the violence in my book, and working with some of the crime photographers going around to these crime scenes and taking photographs of the dead and of people who are being murdered. So these ethical questions are asked for all of us. How much do we show this? How much do we document the violence? What should you show? Should you show if somebody's been decapitated, should you show that image? Should you show a message written by a drug cartel, or quote that message? Should you quote from a video of a drug cartel? So these are kind of difficult questions that we all faced, and there was no rule book about this. We're like trying to figure out how we cover this, and it wasn't apparent at first as well that it kind of, in a way, you're doing, you're falling into the work of the drug cartel. Because at the beginning it was like, these are important, 12 heads have been put in a town square. We have to report this story.
Yeah, it's a little hard to ignore that and think, well, am I doing the work of the cartel here? When
and
it's
then these
a blatant thing.
and then then these questions were asked in Mexican media, among Mexican newspapers and TVs and reports. How do they publish these? And during a lot of this phase of very open kind of warfare among the cartels that happened in 2009, 2010, 2011, a lot of this was published and a lot of this came out. And then the newspapers stepped back from publishing a lot of this stuff, partly because I think we editors were thinking, should we be publishing this? And partly, it's sad to say, because it became boring. And that's one of the saddest things to say. I remember being in a news agency and an email going around the staff saying, oh, we're no longer covering any decapitation because there's been too many. So there's been so many heads that have been cut off that it's not enough just to say a guy was decapitated in the place. So we're only covering them if there's really extreme circumstances.
Right, a number of heads.
Yeah, such as is it like 18 heads dumped, or is it like like stories like a head put in an icebox, stuck outside a newspaper.
Right. Maybe some limbs missing. And
or these were, or a face sewn onto a football, which was one.
No, you're kidding. That
really happened. A face was sewn onto a football. One. So like it became after a while, the use of violence and the publication of violence becomes too ordinary. It's like so now, and in the situation now, it's like, and there was full-on videos where they'd show them grabbing somebody, cutting their head off with a knife, full-on blood coming.
Yeah.
And then
I was just going to say a classic one that I've seen was a guy over like a log, and sort of head on the log, and then just and I think one with a row of them as well, and done in a really perfunctory sort of manner, chop, and the perfunctory, the sort of dare I say, the ordinariness of it in some ways makes it that more macabre, because of course there's a devaluation then of this is a person there with a life and a history and all that, but it's immaterial. This guy's head needs to come off. It's coming off. Next.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, there's kind of morbid fascination there, and it's like, now one of the things, and you get very numb covering this and seeing this kind of violence, and it does you do lose that humanity, that link to the lives. And one of the things that would bring it back to me covering this, because you turn up on these scenes and you see these bodies on the ground and they could be decapitated or whatever, you're just seeing kind of flesh, and then sometimes family members turn up and you see wives, mothers, brothers, sons, and suddenly you're seeing their face and someone's completely hysterical, someone's their family and they're completely lost it. And that was when it started to strike home, why it's a real human being there. This human being with their story, with their life. And this is real brutality. And again, these are things which echoed, I think, with a lot of the newspapers about how to cover these. And so a lot of these videos were kind of pushed to darker corners of the internet. And Blog del Narco, there was an attempt to kind of shut it down, I think, under the government of President Enrique Peña Nieto, when they came in. Their strategy was to try and have less talk about the whole drug violence, try and change the conversation. Because the kind of idea was that Mexico was stuck in this conversation about violence all the time, just dominating. Every time you hear Mexico, you hear drug cartels, you hear violence. Everyone working, on trying to get, sell Mexico to businesses, sell Mexico to tourism. It was always like this annoying kind of background of violence. Every time you mention Mexico, it's like drug cartel, narcos. So the kind of idea was you change the conversation. Didn't work as a strategy, actually, because their government then fell into massive tragedies happening, and it really got undermined with the disappearance of 43 student teachers in 2014. But I think that was kind of an attempt to change the conversation. But you did see successfully the more violent videos being pushed to darker corners of the internet.
And I wonder if the notoriety, of course, from the through media, how to what degree did that feed into building this sort of this dramatic, this theatrical interest in this area as well?
So yeah, you had in the 2010s the kind of growth of first of Latin American TV series about drug cartel figures. They started really in Colombia, and you had some of these ones based on the testimonies of drug traffickers, like one called El Cartel de los Sapos, which is like the cartel of the snitches, the cartel of the grasses. You say El Cartel de los Sapos. And then that was a TV series, and a book, TV series on that. And then these ones moving to Mexico. So you had one called El Señor de los Cielos, very loosely based on this guy, the Lord of the Skies, who was a big drug trafficker in the 90s, with these big aeroplanes. And you had a series based on him, which became very popular in Mexico and in all Latin America, all of the Spanish-speaking world. They became very popular TV series. Another one called La Reina del Sur, the Queen of the South, very famous one based on a book written by a Spanish writer. So first you had the big growth of Latin American soap operas, and then you had the series on Pablo Escobar called El Patrón del Mal.
I've seen that one, yeah.
I recently met Pablo Escobar's son, and I was talking to him about his views on the TV series.
Right.
He has watched it himself, and his kind of views, and how he thinks, they're too glamorized or whatever.
Yeah.
So you had the ones in Spanish, which then, massive audience in Spanish and a big audience crossing over into English. A lot of people in the UK, I'm happy to sit there and watch subtitled TV series of El Chapo and El Patrón del Mal and these kind of things.
Yeah, which is incredible given how ignorant we are over here. Of languages, yeah.
Because the interest is there, and it is very, very fascinating stuff. And I can see, some of us, myself as a journalist covering this for a lot of years, and I think a lot of other journalists who have covered this very intensely feel you get worn out with this stuff. And you actually get drained and worn out and kind of a bit numb to it. And watching the stuff on TV, you've kind of already seen a lot of it in real life kind of play out. And it's a lot grimmer and nastier in real life than the TV versions. The TV series are often focusing on, in some ways, the TV series are a bit like, say, these kind of, if you go back to the 80s, these ones like Dallas and Dynasty.
Yeah, and Dynasty, yeah.
Which are focusing on the super rich. So they're focusing on the top level of the rich guys among the cartel world, and not the regular kind of working class of the cartel, which is the way most of these gangsters actually experiencing it, which is a lot more grimy. Another aspect, so flipping back a second, so you had these soap operas, which kind of have these kind of narco soap operas, or they call them narco telenovelas in Spanish, and they kind of had the quite glamorized side of the high things, with different levels of kind of educational of actually showing how this stuff worked. And then you had the growth of American or international producers making the dramas. So then you had the film Sicario, the TV series Narcos, with more like bilingual stuff, and kind of showing, having more of the American angle in there as well. And having as well this kind of, also really a bit more of a glamorized kind of side. And this being a kind of very popular dramatic theme. And meanwhile, the violence was carrying on the ground at, really, really heavy levels. Now, in some ways, the most public violence that we'd seen before went down a little bit. And we weren't seeing the 49 headless bodies dumped on a street. But we were seeing a huge amount of bodies turning up, a huge amount of mass graves and bodies being buried, and a lot of the kind of dark stuff underground. Now we had then a new aspect to the social media of the drug cartels, and that was particularly coming out of Sinaloa. A group of these guys that are known as narco juniors, who are the young sons of the drug traffickers, and the classic example is the sons of El Chapo. And they were like young guys who, unlike their parents, who had grown up often in the mountains, in these very rough villages in the mountains, and been, cutting opium, when they were 15 years old and getting into the drug trade that way. These were guys who went to private schools in these drug trafficking areas. When I've talked to some of the people who went to the schools with them, and they were kind of funny because on one side they were kind of celebrities because they're like dads of these famous drug traffickers.
Yeah.
On the other, some of the richer kids in the private schools, or some of the the more educated ones, would like look down on them, like they actually, they're kind of a little bit common for us. These guys, they can't.
Hugo Riche.
Yeah, these people like we're trying to like concentrate and get some grades, and these guys they can't really study. They haven't really got any an academic background. But other kids who would be like following them around and be wanting to be like friends with El Chapo's son, or friends with El Mayo's son, or friends with the sons of these big gangsters. Now they then had a big entourage of women as well, and you've got a big scene in Sinaloa, what they call buchonas. So buchonas are the women who are like the girlfriends of drug traffickers, or in this kind of scene, who would often get like plastic surgery, have fake boobs.
Right.
Thinking the right word to use, fake breasts. Yeah, fake boobs, fake breasts.
Yeah, fake breasts.
Who would have...
well, you can say in a technical way, a cosmetic enhancement or...
Yeah, breast enhancement.
Breast enhancement, maybe, yeah.
Who would be kind of sometimes quite extreme plastic surgery. Some of these, you see some of the photos of these women, like crazy long nails, extreme surgery, and at the scene of them, and then you had some of these narco juniors moving around and posting on social media, getting their own social media following. So they're posting, saying, look at me with my girlfriends, look at me with the cars, the money, the guns, people, going on, and you had that side as well. And then
because I was going to say, the way that you were describing the women sounds very Instagram ready. This is like what we used to say, it's like HD ready. That there's a sense that, I mean, I'm actually probably, I'm like half the size that I look on on screen because I'm not HD ready. And HD ready means, you got to get gaunt because it's going to view you in a very different way. So a lot of that look that you're talking about is a reflection of the media. I mean, the medium. I mean, that's where it gets very Marshall McLuhan in a way, that they're responding to the medium.
Well, you get into the issue of the woman, and this was a big thing in Medellin, and it became in Medellin, Colombia, and it became very followed in Sinaloa, and they're quite similar in this way. So you had these traditions of a lot of beauty pageants in these places, and in the narcos being involved. Like, I want to get the beauty queen. I want to have the beauty queen. I've got the $1 billion. I also want the beauty queen girlfriend. And so you had that fashion, and there was in fact one of the earlier Colombian TV series was called in Spanish "Sin tetas no hay paraíso," which means like without titties there's no paradise.
God, bro.
And that was actually about this culture of the girls getting breast enhancement surgery to be the boyfriends of narcos, and there's no paradise without the fake breast enhancement. So you had that already there, and then that kind of became big in like Sinaloa, and this kind of culture and fashion around that, and then there's also kind of stories of like the wife or the main kind of girlfriend of one of these drug traffickers hiring hits on one of his other lovers because, they kind of take some attention away there. Now, you also have powerful female figures who become drug traffickers themselves.
Mm.
There are also a tradition of that, and there's also female hit women, female sicarias. And there's even there's also videos of women doing some of these graphic kind of stuff.
Also over here in the UK, the whole notion of female deviancy is really big. If you can find girl gangs.
Yeah. So it's just finding one of the other fascination, because then also like a lot of you have the level of documentaries. There's another strand of the media look at this. We have the documentaries, and a lot of the documentaries are really playing off the same kind of morbid fascination that some of the other kind of mediums are, but sometimes a little bit kind of more highbrow, sometimes not really. But the thing as well is kind of, so you have this kind of weird, then you had the kind of weird phenomenons of, like an ex-hitman for the Colombian, Medellin cartel, a guy called Popeye, who then became a kind of social media star himself, and became he had his own YouTube channel and talking about this stuff. But it's kind of weird thing as well. And then they had this kind of reality show based out of Miami called Cartel Crew, I think they call it, with kind of family members of gangsters, often kind of family members of minor gangsters, but then they had him for an episode, El Chapo's wife, which was kind of a big deal. So something you become like, and it wasn't documentary, it was just reality show.
Right,
regular straight on reality show kind of stuff. So this kind of weird thing where you've got kind of glamour that can carry on and stuff.
Yeah, narco glamour.
Yeah, narco glamour, which the mainstream is buying. And so it's kind of weird, like where are the, and you look like, so where are the ethics of that Cartel Crew, I think it's VH1. Like where are the ethics of VH1 in that point of view? We're just making pure glamour out of, at the same time when you've still got mass graves happening in Mexico, where you've still got like people being brutally murdered and families suffering from this. So yeah, kind of weird morality. And I think for Americans particularly, but I think also for people in the UK, it can be this kind of glamorous, detached story that's quite far away. So like, okay, it's kind of it's kind of fun. You've got these gangsters, you've got this stuff going on, but like when, you see people who are suffering and dying from the violence, sometimes, one of the stories I tell that perhaps that people can relate to as well is that a lot of them, it's not only poor people in Mexico being killed, but also people right across the society being killed. Just sometimes I feel that can try and maybe bring home with people what the suffering really means. When you tell them about a school teacher whose 18-year-old son, who's a philosophy student, was dragged out in front of them and disappeared, and they see no sign of them, or a poet whose 24-year-old son, who's a medical student, is murdered and his body is chopped up. Sometimes Americans themselves, and in a very sad case of a guy who was going through, Harry DeVert, who was going through Mexico on a motorcycle and was abducted, and his body was chopped up and eventually found. And I've talked a lot to his mother in New York, a very nice woman, a very brave woman who was really came down here to Mexico trying to find her son. And you kind of get the real stories of innocent people who are just killed in this, swept up and killed in this, and kind of that doesn't, that what that really means in terms of, this fight is playing out.